So like I was just saying, we're going to try to get through part 5, but we probably won't. We'll get close to the end of part 5, but we'll start with part 4. Right? We ended Words Misunderstood, part 3, which was mainly focused on the two characters who I guess you could say they're the third and fourth main characters. I suppose Tomas is the main character, kind of, if you had to pick one. Tomas is like he's featured more, then Teresa right after him, then Sabina, and then Franz is like, I guess, if you had to rank them in order of importance, that's how it would go. So we're gonna come back to Sabina and Franz in part 6. You're gonna hear, especially Franz, poor Franz, I keep warning you, this guy gets, it's just not good for him. So yeah, part 6, and that's gonna be on Monday. So Monday, we're gonna knock out the end of part 5, whatever we don't get to today, part 5, we're gonna knock out part 6 and part 7, which shouldn't be too hard to do because the last chapter is pretty short compared to the rest of them. Part 6 I got a lot to say about. I don't know, I'll probably have to edit some of my comments. I'm thinking, I'm gonna play by ear, we're gonna see what happens. How many of you have classes after this, a class after this, one that starts at 1? Just one of you? That's it, everybody else? Well, what I'm thinking I might do, we'll play by ear, we'll see if we come in on Monday and I can't get through the end of the book, I might just have my second class as another class, and I'm gonna tell them, look, we might cover chapter 6, but we might just cover chapter 7. I don't know. So read them both, right? So if you want to sit in on my class after this, you can. If that is what happens. It might not. I might be able to get 6 and 7 done in an hour and 15 minutes. We'll see. I doubt it. So I'm thinking, like, again, Monday's gonna be kind of weird. It won't be as weird for you as it will be for my second class. Because I'm gonna ask them if they want to come early, that they could come early. They're like, yeah, right. They're not gonna come early. Some of them might, I don't know, we'll see. But that's probably how it'll go. I'll probably end up doing is the first class, get through most of it. The second class, my 1 o'clock class, I'll finish whatever's left. And then there'll probably be a lot of class left after that. And it'll be sort of wrapping up the course in general and talking about the paper. Talking about the final essay. So that's another reason why it might be good, if you can, to also stay late on Monday, as late as you can if you don't have a class after this, and go to my 1 p.m. class as well. So that's that. All right, so let's jump in. We're at part 4 now, which is focusing on Teresa. She's sort of the focus of part 4. The title of the part is Soul and Body. That's the same title as part 2. So there's a sort of almost this like reflective structure of the novel here. We get another chapter or another part called Soul and Body, and then another one called Lightness and Heaviness, right? Or no, what am I saying? Not lightness and heaviness, lightness and weight. There's a theme in this chapter or part. I keep doing that, saying part when I mean chapter and chapter when I mean part. There's a theme that you could say kind of carries over from the previous, the one that we just finished, Words Misunderstood, part 3. The theme of privacy, but this separation between the public and the private sphere. And I was just thinking about this, so my thoughts are pretty fresh, and I could be wrong. Maybe if I think about it more, I might change my mind. So maybe even you might think differently for what I'm about to say. But to me, it seems like all 3 of the main characters, besides Franz, have a similar view of privacy. They cherish it in a certain way, maybe for different reasons, but it's something that is like special to them. Teresa's mother was anti-privacy, right? Just walking around vulgarly naked, don't be private, stop being modest, And so Teresa longed for that. She wanted to get away from that. She was kind of embarrassed from that. Tomas wants to sort of keep his private life separate from his public life. Remember, if you've gotten far ahead to part 5, he doesn't really want to get involved in politics, even though he writes the letter that gets published and gets him a bit of trouble, right? Once that happens, he kind of wants to disentangle himself from that. He doesn't like to be too public. And then again, Sabina doesn't want her love affair publicized. She wants to keep it. She thinks she can be more honest if she's in private, where she can't really be honest in public, because in public there's all these expectations of the people she cares about, and she's forced to make some reconciliations, and she doesn't like to do that. She keeps betraying. She wants to betray, so she likes to stick away from the public. I guess Franz is the only one who thinks that privacy is bad and that you need to break those walls down. He's tired of living in secret. He's tired of hiding his mistress from his wife. He just wants to be open about things. And so this theme of public privacy and then the public life, this carries over into, I guess, not just part 4, but also part 5, because when we get to Tomas and his letter that he wrote to the newspaper, where he compares the communists, the Czechs who sold out their country to the communist Soviets, he compares them to Oedipus, but they're not. The Oedipus is much more noble. At least he felt guilty about what he did, right? So we'll get to that later, right? Let's get through the few passages that I do have marked down for part 4. This is chapter 4, part 4. So Teresa is, she's living a kind of a separate life from Tomas for a while when he comes back to Prague, I mean, they're living together, but they hardly see each other, right? They see each other like once on the weekends. And so, she goes out into the streets and kind of feels just like a sort of number in a crowd. And I don't know if I want to dwell on this too much, but that seems to be a theme throughout the book, is that like, she's always surrounded by other women who are just and she feels like she's just one woman amongst others, and she wants to be special. Remember, she wants her soul to sort of like be expressed in her body. And there's this metaphor of a concentration camp that she carries with her, right? It reminds me of the dream she had, the first dream with the women in the swimming pool. I guess that wasn't the first one. The first one was all the cats and all that stuff, right? But the swimming pool, right? Sort of all these just naked women. When she goes to the sauna and the way they treat each other, they're just so harsh to each other. But they used to be so nice when the Soviets first came, and there was this camaraderie and all the women in miniskirts yelling at the tanks. But now they're just like everybody else, and they're treating her like, get out of my way, I'm trying to get to the sauna too, right? So she's stepping out into the streets, and she's gazing at the old town hall in Prague, and she makes this point about it. And I don't know, I guess when I was in Prague, it was well after they probably restored the old town hall. It looked really nice when I was there, but I guess this is right after the Soviets came in with their tanks and, after the war, it still hadn't really been rebuilt. And so she's gazing at the remains of the old town hall. This is on page 136. Teresa was suddenly reminded of her mother. So she's comparing her mother to the old town hall, right? So how so? That perverse need one has to expose one's ruins, one's ugliness, to parade one's misery, to uncover the stump of one's amputated arm and force the world to look at it. So she's saying this about the church because she thinks that Prague did this, like a lot of the other churches in Europe were rebuilt as soon as they could be. They were restored to their previous state, but Prague sort of left some of the gaping holes in it, almost as pride, like, look what we had to endure. Look at the ugliness we had to suffer. And she thinks of her mother like this. Remember her mother who almost, because she didn't get her way, she didn't get to pick her suitor, she's going to sort of punish herself and make herself uglier than she is. Everything had begun reminding her of her mother lately. Her mother's world, which she had fled 10 years before, seemed to be coming back to her, surrounding her on all sides. That's why she told Tomas that morning about how her mother had read her secret diary at the dinner table to an accompaniment of guffaws. That's pretty cruel. That scene is pretty like, wow, how messed up, right? When a private talk over a bottle of wine is broadcast on the radio, what can it mean but that the world is turning into a concentration camp? What is he talking about there? A private talk over a bottle of wine broadcast on the radio. What have they just learned about? What's going on in Prague? And really not just Prague and Czechoslovakia, but pretty much all of Eastern Europe at this time that was under Soviet occupation. East Berlin. What was going on? What's she talking about? Private talk is broadcast on the radio.
People's houses,
Right. So people that were suspicious, the government was suspicious that you're not a card-carrying communist sympathizer, don't love the Russians and all this stuff. They would bug their houses, journalists, intellectuals. And so, one of these intellectuals, he had all his private conversations and jokes that he made broadcast on the radio. It made him look really embarrassing because some of the jokes he didn't even mean. He would say some really cruel stuff, but it was obviously a joke. But this is the other thing about the authoritarian regime, and we're going to get to this when we talk about kitsch in part 6, is no irony. There's no irony. He uses the example of Oedipus the king. When Oedipus found out the horrible things that he did, even though he did them unknowingly, he didn't know that he was doing these horrible things. Once he realized that he was guilty, he pulled his eyes out, right? And he says, these guys did it, and they know they were wrong, and even if they didn't know what they were doing was wrong at the time, they don't feel guilty like Oedipus. They don't pull their eyes out, right? And they're like, he wants us to pull our eyes out. It's like, no, it's a freaking metaphor, right? There's no irony. They don't get, that sort of thing. There's no that kind of thing. So, these private conversations with these jokes, that people are like, oh, he said this. Like, he was kidding. It was obviously a joke, But now she says, if this is the case, if everyone's being listened to, the whole world's become a concentration camp. But how does she mean by that? What is concentration camp for her? And it explains here. Almost from childhood, Teresa had used that term to express how she felt about her life with her family. A concentration camp is a world in which people live crammed together constantly, day and night. Brutality and violence are merely secondary and not in the least indispensable characteristics. A concentration camp is the complete obliteration of privacy, right? So again, I think all these characters cherish privacy, except for Franz. I think he's got this hero mentality, right? He keeps thinking about his poor mother, his mother who was trying to cover up her despair and failed. She was wearing mismatched shoes. He saw right through it, but he played along. This is kind of, that also kind of ties into the theme of the chapter, words misunderstood, right? It's like, that's what makes that whole scene so tragic. The mother thinks that she's like sheltering him by, everything's all right, honey, but he knows, he sees right through it. And he knows that she's trying to shelter him, so he shelters her from knowing that she's not sheltering him, and it's like, it's like, and so he plays the hero the whole time, right? He's gonna be, that's why he stays with the wife for so many years, because she was gonna kill herself, right? Gotta save. You gotta save them. You gotta be the hero. So maybe that's why he's got this ego, this sort of privacy for him is not a big deal. He wants to show the world he's a good boy. I don't know why I'm talking so much about Franz though. He's not even in any of the stuff we're going over today, so I should probably save him for later. In chapter 6, we return to the other theme that runs throughout this part, obviously, the soul, the separation of the soul and the body, right? So not just this theme of the public persona versus the private, but also this relationship of the soul to the body that Teresa is so haunted by. She wants her body to somehow manifest what is inside, and she always finds herself falling short. So on page 139, close to the top there, looking at herself, she wondered what she'd be like if her nose grew a millimeter a day. How long would it take before her face began to look like someone else's? And if various parts of her body began to grow and shrink, and Teresa no longer looked like herself, would she still be herself? Would she still be Teresa? Of course. Even if Teresa was completely unlike Teresa, her soul inside would be the same and look on in amazement at what was happening to her body. Then what was the relationship between Teresa and her body? Had her body the right to call itself Teresa? And if not, then what did the name refer to? Merely something incorporeal, intangible? These are questions that had been going through Teresa's head since she was a child. Indeed, the only true serious questions are ones that even a child can formulate. Only the most naive of questions is truly serious. They are questions with no answers. A question with no answer is a barrier that cannot be breached. In other words, it is questions with no answers that set the limits of human possibilities, describe the boundaries of human existence. Very deep philosophical pondering there. This is the age-old question of personal identity. What is the self? What is the I? Is it the body? And really, he's writing in much more modern times. So, he might be thinking of sort of the existentialist debate between someone like Sartre and Merleau-Ponty, right? There was this French existentialist, I mentioned him before, Sartre. He had a big influence on Camus, and Camus on him. They were friends. Merleau-Ponty also was considered an existentialist, although he never considered himself an existentialist. He saw himself as a phenomenologist. We talked about phenomenology before. We talked about Husserl. Remember, Husserl was the father of modern phenomenology, and Camus was kind of critical of Husserl. Well, Merleau-Ponty was also a phenomenologist. He tried to explain experience from the perspective of the subject, of the individual, and Sartre as well, right? They were both doing phenomenology. The big difference is I think Sartre is kind of with Teresa here, right? Or I guess maybe Kundera. I'm not sure if Kundera is trying to endorse this view or he's just presenting it. But the idea that there's something separate from the body, there's something intangible, something incorporeal. It's not bodily, it's not physical, it's the self, right? But someone like Merleau-Ponty or Nietzsche even would say, you are your body, you are your physiology. And that is always changing. We always have this idea, I got this identity, it's the same, Travis is the same. I think I mentioned Socrates when he died, they asked where he'd be buried and he looked at him weird, like, bury Socrates? Oh, you mean my body, right? So my body is not important, it's the soul. And that soul is permanent, unchanging. I'm the same Socrates that I was 4 as I am now 72, taking the hemlock and whatever. But for Merleau-Ponty, and also for like Nietzsche too, your body, your physiology is how you identify yourself. So if your nose grew 1 millimeter a day, you would change, right? Maybe you'd be like really like self-conscious of your nose. Like, I have a big nose, I need a nose job. Like, people look at my nose, like whatever. Like, I don't know what it is. There's a funny story, I think I might have mentioned it. I don't know if it was in this class or my intro. I always talk about this when we cover Nietzsche, and we don't spend much time on Nietzsche in here. So I don't know if I mentioned it, but there's a short story by H.P. Lovecraft. I think it's called The Wanderer or something like this, and it's about a monster. It's told from the perspective of the monster, but the monster doesn't know he's a monster. And so he's like really old. Like, I've lived for hundreds of years. I barely remember my childhood. I have vague memories of my mother nurturing me in my cave, right? And I just stay in my cave, and every 100 years I get hungry. I got to go out and get food. But I don't like to go out because I go out and people I just don't like people. They freak me out. I walk down the street and women start screaming and running, and guys start grabbing knives and running after me. It's like, what is their problem? They're crazy. People are nuts. And then at the end of the short story, he walks in front of a mirror for the first time and freaks out. He's like, what the hell is that? Like, oh, that's me. And then he's like, I'm a monster. Oh my goodness, right? And so it's not just your physicality and your body sort of makes you have an identity of yourself, but sometimes it makes other people react to you in a certain way, and you react to their reaction. My friend Greg is, from Austin. He's this huge, big guy. He used to play football in high school. He's also one of the most soft-spoken, sweetest guys you'll ever. Just real chill, real. And I think it has a lot to do with his size, because he's very intimidating. He walks into a room and people are like, "Whoa, that's a big dude. Don't mess with him." And so he's got to kind of tone it down a bit, and he's like, "Hey, I didn't order this." Oh, sorry, sir, I'm so sorry. He's like, "Hey, I'm sorry, you messed up on the order." He's got to be kind of nice about it, because he knows he freaks people out, And this is something I don't think he thinks about. He's just sort of adjusted himself to it, sort of unconsciously, right? Sartre is so about freedom, and you're very aware, and you create yourself and your identity. But for someone like Merleau-Ponty and Nietzsche, a lot of it is just unconscious. You just do it because, right? And it has a lot to do with your physicality, your body. So your body and what you call a soul are, they're intertwined, and your sense of self and soul change as your body changes and as you relate to the world differently. But I could go over tons of examples, especially in the animal kingdom. Just look at dogs, right? In my neighborhood, I remember growing up, my neighbors had a Chihuahua and a German Shepherd. Who do you think was the boss? The Chihuahua, right? German Shepherds always chill, and the Chihuahua would be loud and barky. In my neighborhood too, I walk through my neighborhood, like pretty much every morning, I go by this yard where there's a little pug and I don't know if it's a German Shepherd or Belgian Shepherd, but it's like, you know, pretty big dog. And the big one just chills, like that little, when I'm walking by, that pug will run up to the fence and with his chest all out, you know, like running all like barking at me until I'm like halfway down the block. And the German Shepherd is just kind of like standing there behind him, just kind of staring, just, you know, waiting to see. You know, if I start walking to the fence to kind of mess with him, you know, kind of screw with him, then the German Shepherd might yap once or something. But like, you know, he's big. He doesn't need to sort of, what's the psychologist, they call it the Napoleonic complex, you know? Napoleon was apparently like really short, you know, he was like 5'3" or 4. So he's vicious, right? He's like, you can call me short, I'll show you, you know, conquer the world, you know? It's like, I'll show you who's short, you know, that kind of thing, you know? So, but he seems to maintain a sort of Sartrean view in this novel, at least, well, I think Teresa does, for sure Teresa does. It's not clear whether he endorses the view or he's just presenting it. But certainly this is, you know, the idea that no, Teresa will be the same, even if her nose grew a millimeter a day, it'd still be the same Teresa underneath there. But what is that? Some mysterious thing. She keeps searching for it. You know, Marley would say, there's nothing there. Your body is and it's constantly changing, and it's constantly, you know, your identity it's more like a river than it is a stone. You know, it's not some bedrock thing that's always constantly changing. It's a process that's flowing throughout your life. I think Sabina kind of gets that with her bowler hat, right? Every time she returns to that motif, it takes on new meaning, and there's more layers added to it. There's not some constant, permanent, I'm defined as this, Sabina, the Czech, the this, the that. Don't put me in a box. I want to keep flowing. I want to be light. I want to experience as much as possible. And I think Teresa tries to do this. She tries to associate more with her body. She tries to live lighter. And this is pretty much all I'm going to focus on in the chapter. There's a lot more to it, the spying and all that stuff, the political intrigue. But the only thing I really wanted to focus on is what does she do to try to be more like Tomas? She tries to step out of her heaviness and be light, and it really backfires. It actually makes life a little bit more heavy for Tomas. What does she do to be adventurous? Y'all didn't get to the end of the chapter? It's pretty close to the end of the chapter. I'm skipping quite a lot. What does she do to try to like get it? What is she doing for a living now? So Tomas is going. He's a surgeon for a while until he gets in trouble, and then he has to clean windows or whatever, right? Because of his naughty article that we'll talk about in a little bit when we get to chapter 5. But what does she do? And I don't think he ever finds out about it either, does he? I think maybe she does tell him what happened.
She had an affair.
Yeah, she cheats on him. Or whatever you want to call it. She sleeps with some guy, right? Who's the guy?
An engineer?
Well, that's what he calls himself, but then she doesn't quite know, right? After a while, she starts thinking, was he a spy? Was he spying on me? I think she's paranoid. I don't think he was really a spy. I think he was just some dude. I think he was just some guy, right? But she's convinced that he was spying on her, trying to maybe frame Tomas or something like this, and now she's like, oh crap. Now you're getting stuff on me. But yeah, he visits her at her job. She's got this job during the day where she's like I said, just another waitress at a local hotel or whatever. And there's this really surly guy that kind of talks crap to her, and the engineer comes in and comes and says something and gets the guy to back off, and she's kind of like, oh, give him a shot. It takes her a while. I think he hits on her a few times, and finally she's like, screw it, I'm going to see what this is all about, right? I'm going to see what Tomas, he can have sex and not care about it. I'm going to try to have sex and not care about it, right? For her, sex is something deep. She wants to be the only one for Tomas, but Tomas doesn't look at sex that way, right? He looks at sleeping together that way, right? We get to fall asleep together. But just having sex, we'll find out in chapter 5 kind of how he feels about it. He's a surgeon. He likes to explore the body, right? It reminds me also Tomas, right, from the Bible. Who was Thomas? One of Jesus' disciples. There's a lot of Thomases in the Bible, but the Jesus one, the one of the disciples, who was he? He doubted, doubting Thomas. You know the story? When Jesus came back, Thomas was like, this is not you, and he's like, I'm alive, and Thomas poked at Jesus' wounds. Yeah, he's like, here, touch, and he touched him. In fact, that kind of ties into the Kierkegaard reading, because remember Kierkegaard said something like, he quoted a passage when he's talking about that section on attunement, when he said, like, this is what Jesus said to Thomas, this is what Jesus said to Thomas after he touched his wounds and believed. He's like, now, he says, you see, so now you believe. Blessed is those who believe but did not see. And so it's like, you had to have evidence, you had to touch. But there's others, the other disciples are the women that came to try to find Jesus in the tomb and he was risen. They believed, they didn't need proof. Thomas had to pick and prod. Okay, I guess you're true, I guess you're real, you know? So it's like, better those that didn't need to see to believe. I don't know how that ties in. I guess it kind of ties in a little bit, like the touching the wounds and the body and feeling physical. I guess Thomas is kind of like that. Whereas again, Teresa's like, there's something invisible in me, some beautiful soul I want to express with my body. But so she's trying to be more like Thomas here. And I guess like you saw, like I said, it backfires. Chapter 8, there's this interesting section on flirtation. And she's not very good at it, right? She sucks. She's not good at flirting. What is flirtation? One might say that it is behavior leading another to believe that sexual intimacy is possible, while preventing that possibility from becoming a certainty. In other words, flirting is a promise of sexual intercourse without a guarantee. When Teresa stood behind the bar, the men whose drinks she poured flirted with her. Was she annoyed by the unending ebb and flow of flattery, double entendres, off-color stories, propositions, smiles, and glances? Not in the least. She had an irresistible desire to expose her body, that alien body she wanted to expel into the big wide world, to the undertow. Thomas kept trying to convince her that love and lovemaking were two different things. She refused to understand. Now she was surrounded by men she did not care for in the slightest. What would making love with them be like? She yearned to try it, if only in the form of that no guaranteed promise called flirting. Let there be no mistake, Teresa did not wish to take revenge on Thomas. She merely wished to find a way out of the maze. She knew that she had become a burden to him. She took things too seriously, turning everything into a tragedy, and failed to grasp the lightness and amusing insignificance of physical love. How she wished she could learn lightness. She yearned for someone to help her out of her anachronistic shell. If for some women flirting is second nature, insignificant, routine, for Teresa it had developed into an important field of research with the goal of teaching her who she was and what she was capable of. But by making it important and serious, she deprived it of its lightness, and it became forced, labored, overdone. She disturbed the balance between promise and lack of guarantee, which, when maintained, is a sign of flirtistic virtuosity. She promised too ardently, and without making it clear that the promise involved no guarantee on her part, which is another way of saying that she gave everyone the impression of being there for the taking. But when men responded by asking for what they felt they had been promised, they met with strong resistance. And their only explanation for it was that she was deceitful and malicious. Right? So she hasn't really practiced, right? She's never been this way her whole life, so you can't really blame her for being a really crappy flirt, right? And also, too, I think in a way, it might be because of that, her heart's really not in it. She's kind of doing it, again, as he puts it, it's like research for her, right? Most people flirt because they're kind of like curious. They're like, she's kind of cute, or he's kind of cute, whatever, and they're kind of feeling him out, but for her, it's sort of like, well, I want to see what it's like to be Thomas, so let me try this. And so it's sort of like, she'll say something like, well, I guess when you flirt with somebody, you say this, and she says something that's like, whoa, like the guy's like, okay, baby, and she's like, oh, wait, I didn't mean that, Well, you should have said it a little bit more flirtatiously, But yeah, this really backfires. And again, she ends up eventually going home with one of these guys. We already talked about it, so I don't want to set it up too much. Like I said, I'm skipping a lot of this chapter. We're going all the way to our chapter 16, part 4. She's in this guy's apartment, his flat, and she's very nervous. She's almost at the point where she's like, I'm just gonna go home, right? I'm not even gonna do this. He leaves the room and she's gonna try to find some excuse. But he starts grabbing her boob, and that's just over. She's like, all right, whatever. So I'm gonna have to go through with it or whatever. But when he walks off, though, she notices the bookshelf, right? This is on the bottom of 153. He disappeared behind the curtain. She went over to the bookshelves. One of the books caught her eye at once. It was a translation of Sophocles' Oedipus. And that's going to be important later. We're going to find out, Tomas uses the story of Oedipus as a metaphor. How odd to find that here. Years ago, Tomas had given it to her. And after she had read it, he went on and on about it. Then he sent his reflections to a newspaper, and the article turned their life upside down. All right, we'll learn more about that here in a minute. But now, looking at the spine of the book seemed to calm her. It made her feel as though Tomas had purposely left a trace, a message that her presence here was his doing. Yeah, I think this is her not able to get away from her heaviness, right? This is the only way she can kind of she never really does what she set out to do. She set out to try to feel what it was like to be light, but as she's doing it, he's still with her. Oh, I'm doing this because I'm doing this to please Tomas, right? To show him that I'm not that serious. I'm not, I don't want to hold him down too much, right? I can be light too. But it backfires, right? She can't really get away from it. That's just her character, I suppose. And again, like we already mentioned, right? She starts to think that this guy's with the secret police and that he's looking for information and all this stuff. And their life becomes really topsy-turvy. She starts thinking about, geez, I just want to go back to the early days. This is I hate to use the word nostalgia because Camus uses it in such a special way, but the more common understanding of nostalgia, this sort of hearkening to the past, this opining for the past. She starts to get a strong sense of nostalgia at this point, right? Why can't I go back? This was a total mistake. Now I'm paranoid. And at the beginning of chapter 25, page 165, people usually escape from their troubles into the future, right? We're usually things will be better once we get this, once we move to the country, once we buy that house, once we get that job, once we get our degree, it's going to be fine. But for her, there was no future. They got to a point where they didn't know what to do, right? The Soviet occupation, the persecution of Tomas, it seemed like no matter what they could say, it's just going to make them worse. And so by the end of the book, Tomas he almost does, I just thought of this, he almost does what Teresa's mom does. He can't really get his way, so he basically makes his life as worse for himself as possible, right? He's like, you're going to try to bribe me. You're going to try to dangle this in front of me. Well, I'm going to make it so that my whole life is miserable and worthless, so you've got nothing to bribe me with, basically. I'm going to become a window cleaner. I'm going to go live in the country and do nothing, basically. And so in a way, he ultimately is driven to this point. But in a way, maybe it's not, because I think Teresa's mother, it was lack of pride. She didn't have any pride. She lacked it. But for him, it was for pride. It was because he wanted to keep his sense of pride. He's like, I'm not signing that thing just because you want me to. I'm not going to make this statement just because you want me to. Screw it. Fire me. I'll lose my job that I love. I'll do that. Screw you. Right? Just for principle. Just because I'm proud, kind of thing. So in a way, they both, Teresa's mother and Tomas both expose themselves, lower themselves, humble themselves, but for different motivations, I guess. One out of pride, Tomas, one out of lack of pride. But yeah, people usually escape from their troubles into the future. They draw an imaginary line across the path of time, a line beyond which their current troubles will cease to exist. But Teresa saw no such line in her future. Only looking back could bring her consolation, right? So again, this nostalgia. They try to drive through these old parts of the city to sort of recapture some of their old memories, but everything has changed. All the signs are different names. The streets have been renamed by Russian political figures, Lenin Street, Stalin Avenue, and all this stuff. They can't go back to that past that they sort of took for granted while it was happening, but now they harken back to it. Well, let's talk a little bit about this Oedipus story, and what does it have to do with Tomas? Maybe you know the story of Oedipus. He gives a version of it here that's pretty short. Maybe I should just read that version because it'll save us time. It's not my favorite version, but it kind of gets at the essence of the story. And it's at the very beginning of part 5. So now we're moving on to focusing on Tomas. Tomas is the focus here. This is on page 175, the second paragraph. The image of the abandoned child had consequently become dear to him. Remember Teresa, the abandoned child, Moses in the basket and all that? He often reflected on ancient myths in which it occurred. It was apparently with this in mind that he picked up a translation of Sophocles' Oedipus. The story of Oedipus is well known. Abandoned as an infant, he was taken to King Polybus, who raised him. One day, when he had grown into a youth, he came upon a dignitary riding along a mountain path. A quarrel arose, and Oedipus killed the dignitary. Later, he became the husband of Queen Jocasta and ruler of Thebes. Little did he know that the man he had killed in the mountains was his father, and the woman with whom he had slept was his mother. In the meantime, fate visited a plague on his subjects and tortured them with great pestilences. When Oedipus realized that he himself was the cause of their suffering, he put out his own eyes and wandered blind away from Thebes. Right, pretty, horrible story, right? The idea though is that he realized what he had done and pulled his eyes out. I guess they're leaving out some details, right? His father was told, your son will kill you and marry your mother or marry your wife, and he's like, what? I'm gonna get rid of my son. So he, puts him in a basket, and actually he tells his servants to put him out in the woods and let the wolves eat. And the servants are like, tells his servants to go kill him. Go kill this kid. And the servant's like, I can't kill a baby. I'm just gonna leave him here, see what happens. And then he gets adopted, and when he gets older, he's told by some fortune teller, you are gonna kill your father and you're gonna marry your mother. And he thinks that the guy that adopted him is his father. So he's like, I'm gonna get away. I love my father. He's a good man. He raised me. I'm gonna get away from him. And by trying to be good, he inevitably does bad. He inevitably kills his actual father and marries his mother. So he was innocent in a certain sense, but once he realized what he did, he felt so bad about it, he pulled out his own eyes. He couldn't handle it. He blinded himself, and he left in exile. And so Tomas is thinking of this, and he's thinking about his country and how so many of the people who actually helped the Soviets take over were traitors, but some of them thought they were doing the right thing. They thought they were bringing, freedom and, workers' rights, and communism was going to be great for everybody, was going to get free food, and, what's the Marxist slogan? To each according to their need, by each according to their ability or something. But no, it didn't work out that way. It was horrible. Eastern Europe was a hellhole in the 70s and the 80s. In the late 60s. Anyone who thinks that the communist regimes of Central Europe are exclusively the work of criminals is overlooking a basic truth. The criminal regimes were made not by criminals, but by enthusiasts convinced they had discovered the only road to paradise. They defended that road so valiantly that they were forced to execute many people. Later, it became clear that there was no paradise, that the enthusiasts were therefore murderers. Then everyone took to shouting at the communists, you're the ones responsible for our country's misfortunes. It had grown poor and desolate. For its loss of independence, it had fallen into the hands of the Russians. For its judicial murders. And the accused responded, we didn't know, we were deceived, we were true believers. Deep in our hearts, we were innocent. In the end, the dispute narrowed down to a single question. Did they really not know, or were they merely making believe? On 177 at the top. But he said to himself, this is Tomas, he said to himself, whether they knew or didn't know is not the main issue. The main issue is whether a man is innocent because he didn't know. Is a fool on the throne relieved of all responsibility merely because he is a fool? Let us concede that a Czech public prosecutor in the early 50s who called for the death of an innocent man was deceived by the Russian secret police and the government of his own country. But now that we all know that the accusations are absurd and the executed are innocent, How can that self-same public prosecutor defend his purity of heart by beating himself on the chest and proclaiming, my conscience is clear, I didn't know, I was a believer? Isn't his I didn't know I was a believer at the very root of his irreparable guilt? It was in this connection that Tomas recalled the tale of Oedipus. Oedipus did not know he was sleeping with his own mother, yet when he realized what had happened, he did not feel innocent. Unable to stand the sight of the misfortunes he had wrought by not knowing, he put out his eyes and wandered blind away from Thebes. When Tomas heard communists shouting in defense of their inner purity, he said to himself, as a result of your not knowing, this country has lost its freedom, lost it for centuries perhaps, and you shout that you feel no guilt? How can you stand the sight of what you've done? How is it you aren't horrified? Have you no eyes to see? If you had eyes, you would have to put them out and wander away from Thebes. Right, so this is his attitude. And Tomas is not a very political guy, but you can imagine living in a country, like I never considered myself much of a patriot. I guess I was sort of like anti-patriot growing up as like a teenager. I was like, screw the government, that. But like, I get angry when I don't want to get too much into it because I'll go on a freaking rant, but when I see what some of our leaders have done, I think it's treasonous. What they've done, all the money and resources they've wasted to line their pockets and make our standing in the world worse and kill innocent. I don't want to get started. I'll go on a freaking tangent. I think it's treasonous, and it makes me kind of patriotic. It's like, geez, like I just want to go about my day and teach philosophy, but you're going to screw up my whole society. So this, I think, Tomas doesn't want to be political, but he's so disgusted by the way some of his fellow citizens are acting, and it's almost like he doesn't blame them. He's like, maybe you didn't know. Maybe you didn't know. Maybe you thought you were saving the world when you were actually making it a worse place. But now that you know, you should feel ashamed. This is kind of how I feel about, a lot of people, like, again, I don't want to be anti-military. People that go fight for our country, good for you, man. But our military has done some horrible stuff. We don't teach about it in school, but look it up. It's real stuff. Malay massacre in Vietnam, just this latest drone strike, a bombing in Syria that just happened recently where 30 or 40 civilians were killed, And what do we do when it happens? Oh, that was a mistake. We didn't know. We didn't know. Sorry. Bad information. Bad intelligence. Okay. Could you get fired or something for that? Maybe. No. Just you got collateral damage. If I was working at 7-Eleven and I accidentally pushed the wrong button and the freaking gas station blew up and killed 40 people, I didn't know that button killed people. Oh, it's okay. You didn't know. I hope at least I get fired or something for that. Like some sort of, does anybody get any, punishment for this? I don't know. So I think Tomas, again, he's not the type to want to get involved. He's just so angry. So he writes this letter, it gets published, and it totally screws him up, right? Because what happens? How does this screw up his career? Yeah, he has to write a retraction, right? His boss comes up to him and says, hey, that letter that you wrote, and what really is screwed up too is when they published the letter, what happened?
Oh,
They shortened it, so it kind of like screwed up the meaning of it. It really left out a lot of stuff, so it made it look a lot more like simple-minded and less sophisticated. And maybe like I was saying earlier that, authoritarians, communists, people like, I think the woke crowd is kind of like this. They don't get irony. They don't get, you're just joking. They take everything freaking literally. So it's like, you said that means this, and that means you're that. It's like, no, it was a freaking joke. I was speaking ironically, so I think that, to be fair, maybe also it was the fact that a lot of it was redacted, so the subtlety was taken away. And so he didn't even like it. When it was published, he didn't even like it. So it's kind of weird that he refuses to sign it. He's like, it's almost like on principle. He's like, well, I didn't really agree with it, but the fact that you're forcing me to sign it, it kind of makes me not want to sign it. Screw you, right? And this really pisses off his boss. And so this is chapter 3, page 179. There were two things in the balance. His honor, which consisted in his refusing to retract what he said, and what he had come to call the meaning of his life. his work in medicine and research. So this is a tough decision for him. We finally, and this is the point in the novel, I think, where we start to reveal what his true Eskimo sign is. Remember that Beethoven motif? Eskimo sign, it must be. Like he has to go back to Prague to see Teresa, but then he gets there and he says, no, I don't really have to. What am I doing here? But he does have an Eskimo sign. Being a surgeon, he's passionate about his job. So the one thing that gives his life meaning that he's really into, he's basically he has to choose between that and his dignity. And he's kind of like, fuck, and he chooses his dignity ultimately, but he hates that he's put in this position. This is on page 182. At the bottom there, he says, and suddenly Tomas grasped a strange fact. Everyone was smiling at him. Everyone wanted him to write the retraction. This is what's funny. There's two groups of people, right? They both want him to sign it. The first group is the obvious group that you probably already know what I'm talking about, the boss that wants him to just write the stupid thing so he can go back to work. Who are the other people that want him to sign it? Who kind of like smile. They're the ones that they're the self-righteous. Why are they self-righteous? Well, they're like, we would never do that. And so they don't actually do anything, but if he does something, they can say, well, I didn't have to sign. Well, you weren't forced to. You weren't asked to. Piece of ass. It's like, so these people that are sort of self-righteous, they're like, oh yeah, you're just gonna sell out. I know you are. Yeah, go and sign that letter. Go ahead. Yep, I would never do it. I'm better than you, right? So there's that type, and then there's the type that like, come on, just freaking sign it and get back to work. I know you don't mean it, but he's like, I don't want to please either one of these dicks, And he's like, but he's forced to, like, no matter what he does, he's like, it's a lose-lose situation, right? Everyone wanted him to sign. It would make everyone happy. The people with the first type of reaction would be happy because by inflating cowardice, he would make their actions seem commonplace and thereby give them back their honor. Oh yeah, the people that already signed it themselves are like, well, see, even he did, right? So I'm not such a wuss, right? Even Tomas signed it, right? The ones that were all sniveling and signed to begin with. The people with the second type of reaction, who had come to consider their honor a special privilege never to be yielded, nurtured a secret love for the cowards. For without them, their courage would soon erode into a trivial, monotonous grind admired by no one. Tomas could not bear the smiles. He thought he saw them everywhere, even on the faces of strangers in the street. He began losing sleep. Could it be? Did he really hold those people in such high esteem? No, he had nothing good to say about them and was angry with himself for letting their glances upset him so. It was completely illogical. How could someone who had so little respect for people be so dependent on what they thought of him? And this is a conundrum that I guess this is why I kept giving Camus a bunch of shit in his essay. Because I feel like, this idea of absurdity and embracing the absurd and never taking anything too seriously, it's hard to do, even if you're Tomas. Like, even if you don't care about people. Like, I think I told you about that woman I went on a date with who said, I don't care what anybody thinks about me. It's like, yeah, you do. Right? And it's like Tomas does to a certain extent. He might not care about their approval, but he hates, that he's pleasing them or displeasing them. And he hates that he has to think about it, but he's forced to do this. And so this is something we can't really, extract ourselves from as much as we try to. At the bottom of 183, a doctor, unlike a politician or an actor, is judged only by his patients and his immediate colleagues, that is, behind closed doors, man to man, right? There's his privacy, right? Man to man, one-on-one, I'm judged fairly. Right? I don't like this public, screw that. I don't want all these eyes on me. Confronted by the looks of those who judge him, he can respond at once with his own look to explain or defend himself. Now, for the first time in his life, Tomas found himself in a situation where the looks that were fixed on him were so numerous that he was unable to register them. He could answer them neither with his own look nor with his words. He was at everyone's mercy. People talked about him inside and outside the hospital. It was a time when news about who betrayed, who denounced, and who collaborated spread through nervous Prague with an uncanny speed of a bush telegraph. Although he knew about it, he could do nothing to stop it. He was surprised at how unbearable he found it, how panic-stricken it made him feel. The interest they showed in him was as unpleasant as an elbowing crowd or the pawings of the people who tear our clothes off in nightmares, right? So again, even if you're someone like Tomas, who's a fairly independent spirit, it's pretty hard to sort of extrapolate or sort of eradicate, pull yourself away from some relation to other people, right? Even if you're just a private doctor. We get to chapter 7 though, and here's the part that, this is where I think Kierkegaard would sort of, his ears would perk up. You know, remember Kierkegaard, for him, life's about finding your Isaac or whatever it is. Everyone's got their own Isaac. We all have this one thing that's going to be the most important thing, and all things that everything else is going to be valuable in relation to that one thing. Kierkegaard would definitely say that his job, his career as a doctor would be that thing, you know. But I think Camus would actually like what happens later in the chapter, or later in the part, where he is able to find joy in his pretty ridiculous job as a window cleaner. He's like, screw it, this is kind of fun. I can find joy in this too. That's the absurd man. That's exactly what Camus would like. You know, pick up another rock, go up the hill, and learn to live with it, right? You know. So I think Camus would like that. But Kierkegaard would say, that sucks. We need to go back to an Esmosign, my job. I'm a doctor. So this is chapter 7. Leaving Zurich for Prague a few years earlier, Tomas had quietly said to himself, Es muss sein. He was thinking of his love for Teresa. No sooner had he crossed the border, however, that he began to doubt whether it actually did have to be. Does that mean his life lacked any Es muss sein? Any overriding necessity? In my opinion, it did have one. But it was not love, it was his profession. He had come to medicine not by coincidence or calculation, but by a deep inner desire. Insofar as it is possible to divide people into categories, the surest criterion is the deep-seated desires that orient them to one or another lifelong activity. Every Frenchman is different, but all actors the world over are similar, in Paris, Prague, or the back of beyond. An actor is someone who in early childhood consents to exhibit himself for the rest of his life to an anonymous public. Without that basic consent, which has nothing to do with talent, which goes deeper than talent, no one can become an actor. Similarly, a doctor is someone who consents to spend his life involved with human bodies and all that they entail. That basic consent, not talent or skill, enables him to enter the dissecting room during the first year of medical school and persevere for the requisite number of years. So, this is what I think is appropriately referred to as a calling. He's saying that everyone has a calling. And so people that are actors, it's a type. That, some people are born to be actors. Some people are born to be physicians. It's just something calls them to that way of life. That's very Kierkegaardian, I think. Again, like I said, later in the chapter, though, we get more Camus. Because it's like, even though he lost his job, he was able to still kind of whistle while he worked, kind of thing. Of course, he was philandering and sleeping with a bunch of women while he's doing it, so that might have helped. If it was just washing windows, would he have been, people were getting him drunk too most of the time. People would invite him over, don't worry about cleaning windows. We just love you because you sacrificed yourself for Prague and you're one of the old people and, you're a hero. So just get drunk and I'll charge you for 20 windows. And it's just, So yeah, I guess I could learn to live with that, rendezvous with like all these different women along my, my routes. Yeah, sure. This is on page 196. It is my feeling that Tomas had long been secretly irritated by the stern, aggressive, solemn Es muss sein, and that he harbored a deep desire to follow the spirit of Parmenides and make heavy go to light. Remember that at one point in his life, he broke completely with his first wife and his son, and that he was relieved when both his parents broke with him. What could be at the bottom of all of it but a rash and not quite rational move to reject what proclaimed itself to be his weighty duty, his Es muss sein? That, of course, was an external Es muss sein, reserved for him by social convention. whereas the esmal sign of his love for medicine was internal. So much the worse for him. Internal imperatives are all the more powerful, and therefore all the more of an inducement to revolt. So again, this is kind of back to my point about the calling. All these other imperatives, the esmo sign, were external. Even Teresa, which is Teresa mentioned in that passage I just read? Talking about his parents and the wife. Those were social conventions. Those were things that he had to do because he had to be a good boy because society said so. But his job as a physician was an internal thing. He was called towards it. He had actual interest, had actual passion in it. But now he's sort of reduced to being a window cleaner because he refused to sign the retraction. At the top of page 197, though, it says, here he was doing things he didn't care a damn about and enjoying it. Now he understood what made people he always pitied, happy when they took a job without feeling the compulsion of an internal esmo sign and forget it the moment they left for home every morning. This was the first time he felt that blissful indifference. Whenever anything went wrong on the operating table, he would be despondent and unable to sleep. He would even lose his taste for women. The esmo sign of his profession had been like a vampire sucking his blood. This kind of reminds me of a time in my life when I definitely don't think that my job at Whole Foods was my esmo sign, but I remember being a butcher, or I guess what you call a meat cutter if you want to be technical. I would just tell people I'm a butcher because nobody meat cutter. What's that? That's lingo. That's technically. But if I said butcher while I was at work, all my you're not a butcher, son, boy. I used to be a butcher at the slaughterhouse. Blah, blah, blah. You're a meat cutter. I'm like, dude, I'm at a cocktail party. They don't know the difference. Yeah, I'm a butcher. I work in the meat department. But it was like that. I mean, it was not as important as a job like saving people's lives, but it's the kind of job that you take home with you, which you don't realize that. Like, is like what? Yeah, like it's perishable food. Like it's gonna go bad, and if you don't sell it, it's gonna go bad. So there's all these things you have to do to try to work the meat out, right? Like you cut the steak, it doesn't sell, you grind it. If it doesn't sell, then you turn it into a patty. If it doesn't sell, you throw it away, and you lost a bunch of money. So like you're constantly thinking, oh my God, there's like 60 pounds. We over-ordered all that pork. I've got to make a bunch of sausage tomorrow, but we don't sell that much sausage, so maybe we'll have to make some breakfast. You're thinking all this crap, like you're taking it with you everywhere. And my last year and a half of working at Whole Foods, I transferred to the front end where I could just bag groceries and be a cashier because they were going to pay me the same money. And when I found that out, I was like, you're going to pay me the same to be a cashier? Could I because I was so stressed out. I was going to school full time. I was working full time. I was like, I need a break. I need something to like de-stress, not worry about. I remember the people that worked in the front end didn't get it. They were like, it's easier up here than in the meat department. Like, what do you think, the meat cuts itself back there? Yeah, but we have to deal with customers. Oh, so do I. I gotta cut their meat. Like, they want the dumbest stuff.
Could you take that tuna and cut it into quarter-pound pieces and package them all separately for the freezer?
And it's like, yeah, but there's a guy behind you that just wants like a pound of beef. Could I get him first? I'm in a hurry, please. It's like, the guy behind you is just looking at you like all dirty, like, oh, I have to wait this long. This guy's asking me for 20 days. Like it was a stressful job, and I was like, I just want to bag groceries, paper or plastic. You know what I mean? And I actually kind of enjoyed it. Even though it was like I had a lot of fun up there. Even though it was like dead, I'd be like up in the front, just like walking around, saying hi to customers and stuff, reorganizing. They love me up there. They're like, you're so good, you work so hard. I'm like, this is way better than, because like not only to cut the meat, you got to clean those big ass machines and take them apart. That was kind of fun though, cleaning the market. You get a big old like pressure hose and you just spray everything down with soap and then just spray it. It's kind of fun. That was kind of fun. But yeah, not a glamorous job. I don't know, do we want to do this? I'm thinking about skipping this part. It's kind of interesting, but I don't know if it's essential to the story. This section about Tomas and kind of his philandering, his womanizing, what really drew him to it. It's I guess it sort of relates to his obsession with the human body in the surgical sense of being a surgeon. And it kind of ties in, maybe I will read it, because it kind of ties in to Teresa in the way that she's looking for the soul, right? I've got this body, but I want my soul to sort of, my body to be a reflection of my soul. What is the soul though? Like, really, what is that? Is a question that's asked. No, it's what's left over when you sort of negate the body. But for Tomas, he seems to have a very corporeal, he's more like Merleau-Ponty or Nietzsche, idea of the self or the soul, because he's looking for the reason he goes for all these different women is he thinks that sex is what reveals that 1 millionth aspect, that special thing, that, everyone's the same. If you look at them on the street, one woman is no different than the other, but when you see them naked, I guess, or when you make love with them or something, that reveals some secret, some uniqueness about them, that 1 millionth mysterious part, that secret self, that inner self. This is on page 199, pretty close to the top. What did he look for in them? What attracted him to them? Is it making love merely an eternal repetition of the same? Not at all. There's always the small part that is unimaginable. When he saw a woman in her clothes, he could naturally imagine more or less what she would look like naked, his experience as a doctor supplementing his experience as a lover. But between the approximation of the idea and the precision of reality, there was a small gap of the unimaginable. And it was this hiatus that gave him no rest. And then the pursuit of the unimaginable does not stop with the revelations of nudity. It goes much further. How would she behave while undressing? How would she say, or what would she say when he made love to her? How would her sighs sound? How would her face distort at the moment of orgasm? What is unique about the eye that hides itself exactly in what is unimaginable about a person? All we are able to imagine is what makes everyone like everyone else, what people have in common. The individual I is what differs from the common stock. That is, what cannot be guessed or calculated at, what must be unveiled, uncovered, conquered. On page 200, Tomas was obsessed by the desire to discover and appropriate that 1 millionth part. He saw it as the core of his obsession. He was not obsessed with women. He was obsessed with what in each of them is unimaginable. Obsessed, in other words, with the 1 millionth part that makes a woman dissimilar to others of her sex. Here too, perhaps, his passion for surgery and his passion for women came together. Even with his mistresses, he could never quite put down the imaginary scalpel. Since he longed to take possession of something deep inside them, he needed to slit them open. We may, of course, ask why he sought that millionth part dissimilarity in sex and nowhere else. Why couldn't he find it, say, in a woman's gait, the way she walked, or culinary caprices, or artistic taste? Well, skipping to the bottom there, only in sexuality does the millionth part dissimilarity become precious, because not accessible in public, it must be conquered. As recently as 50 years ago, this form of conquest took considerable time, weeks, even months, and the worth of the conquered object was proportional to the time the conquest took. Even today, when conquest time has been drastically cut, sexuality seems still to be a strong box hiding the mystery of a woman's eye. So it was a desire not for pleasure. The pleasure came as an extra, a bonus, but for possession of the world, slitting open the outstretched body of the world with his scalpel that sent him in pursuit of women. Right? In a way, I think this is another thing that Camus would like, right? Remember the Don Juanism section of the Myth of Sisyphus? We didn't read it, but I talked about it a little bit in class, right? That Don Juan loves all the women, right? Because he knows how special they all are, right? Or something like that. He's not looking for this ideal. He wants everyone to be unique and special and whatever. But I think the example he gives in this book is kind of crude. The woman that he sleeps with, the tall woman with the weird glances or whatever. In fact, it kind of makes his character very embarrassing. I think it's a very embarrassing scene. It's kind of very awkward, you know?
Yeah, I didn't get it. Yeah. I didn't understand it, the point of it.
I think it's humiliating for him and for her. So I think, to me, the point of it, there's a couple points maybe. It's sort of, it's towards the end, I think, and he's starting to like get tired of it. he's losing, my take, he's losing interest in these rendezvous. He's like, okay, I've had enough. Like, I've explored enough women. Okay, let's go to the country and escape all the people, just me, the dog, and Teresa, you know? And I think that's part of it, but also it's an example of what he just went over here, because you get to learn what her 1/1,000,000th part is, which is kind of weird. Like, what was it? It's something like legs above the head, like 4 or 5 things. It's all like her sexual positions and like how awkward she was. She was very, you know, he's very, what's the word? Assertive in the bedroom. You know, he always says strip. He tells the woman strip, you know, orders her around, and usually the women comply. They're, oh, you know. But this woman's like, no, you strip, you know. And she's like, and he's like, okay. It's just very awkward, you know, and kind of to me, the scene is very embarrassing for him. I read it, I was like, God, how pathetic this guy is, you know. It's like, this woman is obviously, he's not even that into her. She's not even that attractive. He's just like, she's different, you know, she looks odd, and I just want to, because I've never had a woman that weird shape or something like that. What does he say? She looks like an ostrich and
yeah, some sort of bird.
ostrich is like a combination between an ostrich and a penguin. It's like a weird, yeah, it's like, but whatever. Oh, I've never had a penguin looking woman. Let's try this, you know. It's very embarrassing, I think, for him. But I think, yeah, to me, it's sort of like the end of sort of his philandering. It's kind of like this embarrassing sort of like, oh, I need to stop doing this. Maybe he's starting to, you know, get tired of it. And 2, it also kind of is an example of the 1/1,000,000th, right? How does he get at it? What is so unique about her? This is kind of true in a way, though. It's like behind closed doors in the bedroom or whatever, it's like people do act differently, for sure. A lot of times I think they're more honest, right? Like, it's like they're naked literally and figuratively. Do I want to read chapter 10? I said I was going to skip this, but what the hell? We're pretty close to the end, so I guess we got time. Do we? Yeah, we got 6-7 minutes. So let me read this. This is a section on the different types of womanizers. Some are lyrical and some are epic. Tomas is an epic womanizer. Okay, and I guess like the typical, like the romantic story of Don Juan, at least how it's traditionally told, is sort of he's the lyrical womanizer. But remember, Camus didn't like that. Camus said that's a misreading, that Don Juan is not, you know, Don Juan is not looking for that one perfect girl, and then every time he sleeps, he's like, oh, I guess you're not the one. I thought you were. I gotta move on and try to keep finding that one. No, he likes them all. They're all beautiful. They're all great, just their own way. He wants variety. He wants quantity or whatever. That's the epic womanizer. So let's see how Kundera explains. Men who pursue a multitude of women fit neatly into 2 categories. Some seek their own subjective and unchanging dream of a woman in all women. That would be the lyrical. Others are prompted by a desire to possess the endless variety of the objective female world. That's epic. The obsession of the former is lyrical. What they seek in women is themselves, their ideal. And since an ideal is by definition something that can never be found, they are disappointed again and again. The disappointment that propels them from woman to woman gives their inconstancy a kind of romantic excuse, so that many sentimental women are touched by their unbridled philandering. It's like, oh, he doesn't. He's just trying to find a sweet girl. He just can't, right? He can't help himself. We can't hate him for having sex with all these different women. He's trying to find true love, and he just keeps falling short. But Tomas he's the creep. He's the jerk. He's the, what do y'all call him now, ladies? F-boy or whatever, right? The obsession of the latter is epic, and women see nothing the least bit touching in it. The man projects no subjective ideal on women, and since everything interests him, nothing can disappoint him. Right, even if it's an ostrich woman or whatever, you know, it's like, oh, just cool, I'll try that out, you know, see what that's like. You know, as embarrassing as that scene is reading it. The inability to be disappointed has something scandalous about it. The obsession of the epic womanizer strikes people as lacking in redemption by disappointment. Because the lyrical womanizer always runs after the same type of woman, we even fail to notice when he exchanges one mistress for another. His friends perpetually cause misunderstandings by mixing up his lovers and calling them by the same name. Maybe you know people like this. I do. I know women like this. Yeah. In pursuit of knowledge, epic womanizers, like the people like Tomas, and of course Tomas belonged to their ranks, Epic womanizers turn away from conventional feminine beauty, of which they quickly tire, and inevitably end up as curiosity collectors. They are aware of this and are a little ashamed of it. And to avoid causing their friends embarrassment, they refrain from appearing in public with their mistresses. Right? Total F boys right there, I guess. But that's Tomas, right? That's Tomas. And I think this is, again, if you're going to write your paper about Tomas and Camus, that would definitely be a good passage to look at. I think Camus would actually like that. So yeah, it's good. It's good. You know, he's living the absurd life. He's an absurd man. He works from one beautiful experience to another, not taking anything too seriously, looking for variety, looking for, you know, getting as much out of the time that he's got here as possible. I don't think Camus would have approved of everything Tomas did, but that's definitely an attitude I think he would have. Kierkegaard would not have liked it. Or Kierkegaard's like, why go further, right? Just stay with faith. Why move further? Right? This is the disease of modern mind. Well, I'm almost out of time, but this is perfect because this is exactly where I wanted to stop today. This is in chapter 12, page 208. This is the notion of poetic memory that is introduced here. And we'll end class with this, and we'll actually start class on Monday. We'll kind of pick up right here. But let me read the passage, and I'll say a few things before I let y'all go. So this is the bottom of page 208. The brain appears to possess a special area which we might call poetic memory, which records everything that charms or touches us, that makes our lives beautiful. From the time he met Teresa, no woman had the right to leave the slightest impression on that part of his brain. So in a way, he is a faithful. I mean, he's not faithful in body, but he is, I guess you could argue, faithful in spirit, right? That there's a poetic part of his memory that is reserved just for her, right? And none of these other women can touch it, which is sad because this comes on a scene where he's making love to some mistress, and she's one of these deep thinkers that doesn't like the fact that he makes love to her with his eyes open and stares at her. She wants him to close his eyes and become one and fuse, and he's like, no. He's like, no, you deserve it, but you're not getting it from me, right? Teresa's the only thing that has room in my poetic memory is her. She's the only one that has space there. So Teresa occupied his poetic memory like a despot and exterminated all trace of other women. That was unfair because the young woman he made love to on the rug during the storm was not a bit less worthy of poetry than Teresa. She shouted, "Close your eyes, squeeze my hips, hold me tight." She could not stand it that when Tomas made love, he kept his eyes open, focused and observant, his body ever so slightly arched above her, never pressing against her skin. She did not want him to study her. She wanted to draw him into the magic stream that may be entered only with closed eyes. Right? But no, only Teresa, right? Only Teresa. And even with her, he's a bit reserved. The last line of the chapter. I've said before that metaphors are dangerous. Love begins with a metaphor, which is to say, love begins at the point when a woman enters her first word into our poetic memory, right? And of course, we all know that that's how he falls in love with Teresa at the beginning, is a metaphor, right? She comes to Prague, she's sick, he's taking care of her, and he's thinking of her as, you know, this child left in a basket, and he's here to protect her. He has this warm feeling, which he resists, but it's there, and, you know, I guess binds him to her for the rest of their days. All right, well, that's a good place to stop, so we'll stop there. Finish the book over the weekend, because we're going to finish it on Monday.